Gautam Sen, just a brief antecedent. I was in the LSE for 33 years, and I have since become a full-time writer and president of the World Association of Hindu Academicians, which will have its first major meeting in Delhi in November. Welcome all your three talks, sensible. Professor Fuller's views are already, of course, known, and you've mentioned Nicholas Turk's. Let me just say something quickly about the CLG, which is the anti-caste legislation here. We had a meeting with the CLG at which Bharati from the Hindu Forum was present. The senior civil servant told me two things that are worth mentioning. The Community and Local Government Ministry, we went to the ministry. Yeah. Two things they said which are worth mentioning. One is that there's no evidence of caste discrimination, and B, she whispered there will be no legislation. I knew immediately she was lying because this was being pushed very hard by the church, and I'll explain to you why. I was then disinvited from all future engagement because my view was if you demonstrate there is discrimination, I will support the legislation. The reason why they were empowered is because normally they wouldn't have dared because a quiet word from the High Commissioner, which would regard this as interference in India, would have ended the matter. But the High Commissioners since 2004 have been disempowered. They're not allowed to raise a voice against the church because we are ruled by a Catholic waitress in Delhi, a Catholic waitress, let me repeat. So the legislation came and there were attempts successful to mobilize Sikh Dalits, which was an absolute libel because I have been to countless gurdwaras, basically to have their free food in many occasions as a student. They never ask you who you are. And there is no discrimination that I know of in gurdwaras. And I said to them, if you start this over here, you will have incidents of the kind which took place in Vienna, and you will instigate riots in India for which the government of India will hold you responsible. They were a little bit apprehensive, but obviously the support was huge from the church, and these Dalit Christians pushed by the church, and I regret to say some Indian MPs, Virendra Sharma and Barry Gardner, pushed for this legislation. In May 16, there will be a reaction to this from India after the election results are declared. 2 points about what's happening, which is very relevant to what is said over here, and you've already articulated the attempt to define the moral universe of Hinduism as caste. This is a church ruse. I am an expert on Nepal. I was advisor to the Prime Minister of Nepal and the Prime Minister of India. The wave of conversions in Nepal is just phenomenal. I've just come back from Nepal. I went to speak to the military academy. I spoke to all the senior officers, chief of staff, deputy. Absolutely phenomenal. Nepal is about to become Nagaland because the US government has decreed they want a Christian state on the border of Tibet. Indian government, the last 10 years, has not opposed them. There will be a lot of trouble. And all the Christian NGOs are arguing in Nepal, we must empower every caste. There is now huge social tension division across Nepal, Terai, Kathmandu, you name it. Every subcaste is saying we want our rights, where none existed because they were not even aware that they were a different caste. Now, wave of conversion in India in the last 10 years has also been phenomenal. The government has withheld the data. They refused to publish the data in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. Christian organizations, private, say that we have 8% of Indians already as converts. We are not aiming for the whole population like Korea, 65%, but we're aiming for enough as a veto on the Indian polity. This has got nothing to do with religion. This is pure politics originating in Washington. The people who opposed the visa issue for Narendra Modi, for which he did not, by the way, apply, were Christian organizations in the United States. I know because I talked to our most senior diplomats. They are creating the groundwork for huge trouble across India. But this will not happen without huge resistance if the government changes. Because I see this as a plot which originates, and the church here has played a very devious and crafty role. And I regret that so many of my Hindu friends insist on having tea at Lambeth Palace in China teacups. I refuse to go. We should have no interfaith dialogue until they accord legitimacy and say we are legitimate. Until you do that, how can you have a discussion? They have never said we are legitimate as polytheists. Now, I happen to be a Nastik, but I'm a Hindu Nastik. This is all politics. Now, the 2 points I'd like to mention. This social construction of caste is a very interesting thing, you know. Every city in India which fell to a conquering Muslim army was enslaved. Even the Emperor Akbar, who sought to prevent it, failed. Did the enslaved people of all the cities have their own caste? Were the slaves all divided according to caste? So this whole thing is actually a put-up job now for political purposes, and Nepal is the first place where this is being examined and put forward by the church. The Norwegians are at the forefront of conversion, and I was stunned to hear the scale of the conversion in Kathmandu itself. And I regret to say this is all politics, and here it's all politics, and the UK government will pay a price, because we as advisors to the new government will ensure that there is a price to be paid for this interference in our affairs. We are not going to go softly, softly. They have lost Augusta Westland, in which I had a role. They have lost Eurofighter, and they will lose a lot more, because we will not be pleasant and nice. I'm saying this for the benefit of my friends, and the attempt to cause trouble in the Sikh community is the cause for the greatest resentment, because they actually are the one people who had no truck with caste issues. And they're trying to foment trouble because they think this will be costly for the Indian state. So we hold the church here most responsible. And I implore my friends here, do not interact with the church until they give a cast iron guarantee they will not interfere. And all this sweetly talk from Welby and the others, pinch of salt. I'm not angry. I'm just demonstrating to you our determination after May the 16th, when the government changes, that we will not stand for this nonsense. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Satish Sharma. I'm with the National Council of Hindu Temples. We work with over 200 temples in the country. And I was brought into this whole space, in fact, purely and solely because of this caste legislation, this issue. Prior to this, we were all very quietly doing our own Hindu thing. But this particular piece of legislation initiated by Lord Harris is what caught my attention, having lived in this country for such a long time and not being aware of this rampant, violent, racist streak which exists within Hindus, which is so terrible. I'd not come across it, so I thought I'd do my own research. And having done my own research, I came to a slightly different conclusion to what the publicly proclaimed position was. Then I started to inspect the academic work that had been done to arrive at this conclusion. And I must admit that since I started looking at this 2 years ago, the academic work and the responses that you've put forward gives me some tiny little shred of hope that actually the capacity for reason and for study and for putting together an analysis based on evidence hasn't actually been extinguished, so I thank you so much for that. When I read the NISA report and then when I read the EHRC report, I was reminded of a nursery rhyme which I used to teach to my children, and that was, one fine day in the middle of the night, two dead men got up to fight. Back to back, they faced each other, drew their swords and shot each other. It's a string of words, has no meaning whatsoever. It has no internal integrity, and yet it is a string of words. And with all due respect to Dr. Danda, who is present here, when I read the EHRC report, it reminded me of that nursery rhyme. It was a piece of academic work which had no connection to evidence, which had no connection to internal integrity, and was based purely and solely on a prejudiced, presupposed position. And as I say, I'm absolutely so relieved that we now have a genuine academic, unbiased approach to this particular problem, which I hope will be taken up by government and will be reviewed from an impartial perspective. Remember, this whole process was started by a Christian bishop, Lord Harris, standing up and claiming that there were 460,000 Dalits in this country who were being prejudiced and acted against by the other half of the Hindu population. That is the quality of the research that has been used to actually support this whole legislation from the word go. Now, we can no longer believe that this is incompetence. We can no longer believe that this is merely shoddy research. We have to come to the conclusion, which Gautamji expressed so clearly, that this is a deliberate assault on the British Hindu population. Now, he introduced a whole lot of things about India and the global dynamics, etc. But my concern is with the Hindu children in this country, who have been subliminally influenced right from the word go, especially those who are not of the lowest caste. Anybody who is not of this caste who says we're the lowest has now been subliminally influenced that your ancestors were racists. Not only were they racist, but by birth, you are inherently potentially racist, and we need to put that into legislation. It is the moral equivalent of saying to every man, because you have a certain piece of equipment, you're a potential rapist. And so we need to put into legislation preventative mechanisms which prevent you from acting in your natural tendencies. This is how abhorrent and reprehensible this legislation is. And I really sincerely hope that those who have been misused and abused by the vested interests wake up and realize that that is what has actually happened, and genuinely produce some academic work of quality and value to this whole debate.
Yeah, I wanted to make a very simple but practical point, which is around the area of cultural intelligence. In Britain, my observation of doing consulting work with leaders in Britain in this area for the last 7 years has been that their level of understanding about cultural diversity, about faith, about the link between culture and faith, about different paradigms of cultures, is so poor in business, in government, and in the political establishment in this country, that that also plays a part in having these kinds of legislations going through this far in the horizon. So we must not, I mean, you know, at the scholarly level, we have the depth and the understanding and the ability to analyze and even look at culture very closely and microscopically. But at a very practical level, the ignorance about culture and cultural difference is huge in this country. You know? So, thank you.
I found your piece extremely useful and knowledgeable. One thing, if you were to strip away the social evolutionism theory, and if you were to strip away the Aryan theory from the studies you've done, what would be the nature and context of Indian society? I won't say Hindu society, because in the broader sense, in terms of its social arrangements, in terms of Varna, in terms of caste. That's the first question, and I'll come back to, if I may, once you answer that, to a secondary question.
Yes, I mean, I completely disagree with what the other speakers have said, that there is no theory of caste in modern India. I think this is simply untrue. What you have is a great debate about theories of modern caste in modern India, just as you have, for example, enormous debates about the class system of Europe and North America. You would not expect in any significant area of social science investigation for everybody to agree about what the theory was. On the contrary, you'd expect people to disagree. So that the amount of understanding of the caste system today is vastly greater than it was in the 19th century. And what eventually happened was indeed that these, let me make it clear that the Aryan invasion theory was not the key to the explanation that either Ibbotson or Risley gave. What they argued was that was the original root, so to speak, of the system. But it then develops, and for the occupational theorists, it then develops as a function of social evolution. So you have an early stage, thereafter it's social evolution. In the case of Risley argued that there were 7 racial groups in India, and that therefore it was not simply Aryans and Dravidians, it was the multiple migrations within India and from outside which had occurred over many centuries afterwards, which gave rise to a much more complicated structure than just 2. It produced 7. What eventually happens with, during the 30s particularly, is that the evolutionism is still there, but it no longer matters very much, because people are now trying to understand how the caste system is actually functioning. And after independence, by which time evolutionism has become discredited within sociology and anthropology. Does that one work better?
Sorry, first, need to get the microphone a bit closer.
No, it's not that. It's simply not working. It makes no difference.
It's on.
Yeah, hello.
It's just that you're talking too far.
Okay. So that within the, after 1947, this kind of evolutionism becomes discredited within the social sciences. And therefore, people are beginning to study in terms of synchronic functionalist arguments, i.e. what is the system now, rather than considering how it has evolved from the past. And so what you see, since these things never happen instantly overnight, is you see a gradual development from the kind of 19th century ideas in which evolutionism was important, through a kind of interwar period where evolutionism has ceased to be important, but people won't actually get rid of it, to a post-war period in which it's actually actively discarded. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. If I may just ask, I mean, I'm just trying to think visually, if you like. You've got a base reality of society, and then you're basically applying various filters. And those filters are actually having an impact.
Yes, sorry. That's absolutely crucial.
And and that's what I'm trying to get to is how does that change the mindset, the understanding of people? And I go back to the point that you made very early on, which is that in the 1871 census, when people were asked what caste you were,
they didn't know.
They
often
but
didn't
afterwards,
know. Well, I mean, obviously some people knew and some people didn't know. But, I mean, that was a point that I've only mentioned briefly, but of course much of the literature is about precisely this point, which is, again, a very large point, in which there is not not agreement among historians about it. There's absolutely no doubt that the caste system as it was, say, in 1850, is very different from what it is in 2014. One factor in making that change was British policy. The British have a series of assumptions about traditional society. They use, their policy and their censuses are based on that idea. Indians react to that. Both ordinary Indians asking the census, educated Indians studying in English schools, they learn these things. But then there are many other factors as well, which is why it's difficult to sort it out. For example, we know that as the population of India began to rise significantly in the 19th century, the amount of wasteland available dropped. That prevented people moving relatively easily from one rural area to another. That tended to stabilize the populations within villages. That reduced the fluidity of ranking systems which used to exist. So demography was itself a factor in making the caste system become more rigid in the late 19th century than it had been earlier. But trying to work out the cumulative interaction effects of British rule, demographic change, economic change, new intellectual currents among the educated classes within India, to try to work out the cumulative effects of all those processes is something which a lot of historians spend a lot of time trying to do, but it isn't obvious at all.
It's a question to Professor Fuller. I heard you saying that our understanding of caste system today is much better than our understanding of caste system in the past. So I wanted you to show me, take any example or take any property of caste system and show me that in the 1850s this is how we understood it, in the 1900s this is how we understood it, and today we understand it this, and show me that where is the progress there. Any property like endogamy, hierarchy, whatever.
I mean, it's absolutely simple to demonstrate that. In 1850, one of the things that I ought to make clear is that the kind of theoretical basis upon which the colonial anthropologists I'm talking about was a rejection of the sort of earlier material of William Jones, Stuart Elphinstone and so on, precisely because they did not believe that the Varna system was an explanation of what was going on at all. So that one of the things that becomes clear once you start getting systematic investigation of people like Ibbotson is that the caste system is much more complicated and much more fluid than it appeared to be when people assumed that they could understand it in terms of Varna. That's one clear difference between how people understood it.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Are you saying that all that we have done in 150 years is to say caste system is more complex and more complicated and fluid?
Do you want me to give you a proper answer, or do you want to make some rhetorical points?
I want a proper answer under these constraints. Take one property of caste system and tell me, in 1850 we understood this property in this way, 50 years later we understood the same property in this way, and currently we understand this property in this way, and show me the progress clearly.
I don't regard that as a sensible question. I mean, you can't expect me to give a sensible answer to a stupid question. If you want to understand...
the question is stupid.
Because you can't understand how a system works by identifying one particular point in it and then trying to show how the understanding of that particular point has changed. One of the things that's very clear is that there is an understanding of how the system works in a way that was not clear in the past.
What system?
The caste system. Anybody who's actually studied in India, as opposed to just simply speculating about it, would know perfectly well that in an Indian village there is a functioning caste system. Everybody in that village understands that, and any anthropologist who goes to study it can see it. And those of us who've actually done this work know perfectly well that India has a functioning caste system. And those of us who've actually studied the literature know that the caste system as it exists in India today is different from how it existed in the past.
If I may add, this doesn't work, hopefully you will hear me. That two brief remarks. I am hearing and reading in the anthropological literature statements, I will now simplify but not against the meaning, that in fact each and every village has its own caste system, which is restricted. This is what you can read. I can provide the quotes if necessary in the further correspondence, not having them today. But you can find this in anthropological works. People are saying this village has its own system and this village has another complete system. So then what makes it into one pan-Indian system? That's to put it in a very brief way. And another thing that is really a question connected to the discussion about Varna and why I raised it at all is that people like Srinivas, the famous sociologist of India, they are saying, of course, now discard Varna as something that is really meaningful in the discussion about Indian society. But I have spent enough time in India in different places where people do talk in terms of Varna, meaningfully. So we have to explain that. That's simple.
Srinivas gave an explanation of that in about 1955. I mean, what's the problem?
What is his explanation?
The explanation was perfectly straightforward. The people are organised in jati, but these jatis are understood as if they were organised in Varna. And therefore, people make claims, especially caste organisations looking for upward mobility, will make a claim about their Varna identification of their jati. But the system is not the organisation of Varnas, it's the organisation of jatis conceptualised by some people as if it were a system of Varnas.
If I may react to that only very briefly, this is to my ears still confirming the confusion. Are we talking of Varna or Jati?
No,
and what is the relationship between them?
On the contrary, it's not. It's clarifying a point which Srinivas, as I said, if I remember right, the paper was published in 1955, that how people understand their own system is not necessarily how it actually works. And what Srinivas was describing was the difference between how it actually works, i.e. as the interaction of local jatis, and how some people, at least, understand it to work, which is as if it were a relationship between Varnas. This is not a peculiar problem. If you ask people in England how the class system works, you will not get a description which many sociologists of class would agree with. Most people in England don't understand how the class system works. That's why there are lots of sociologists studying it. If it was blindingly obvious to everybody, there'd be nothing to study. We have a question.
Sorry, this is a rather new subject. So I'm a barrister, my name's Seema, and I met Professor Shah at a lecture that he was doing. But I have to say that I actually am more inclined to agree with Professor Fuller, because when you go to India, one thing that's very visible is the way that people treat each other. And when I say treat each other, I mean there's no concept of human rights at all. So a person who's got a servant, for example, wouldn't feel, they wouldn't really think twice about physically abusing their servant. And what I see is that the reason why they feel that they can do that is because they think that they're of a higher caste and the servant's not. So I just have to say that I find it strange that, obviously I don't profess to know anything about it, but the argument that there is no caste system just seems to be quite strange when we see this sort of society in India today.
I would add only two short qualificatory remarks. We are not at all thinking that there is not caste system or there is, but the first problem is that by the word caste, people are referring to different realities in Indian society, apparently. You know, Varna is not jati, is it? Nevertheless, many people talk in the way as you can use very freely sometimes caste as a synonym for Varna, sometimes for jati, sometimes for biradari. So this is one step, you know. It's just showing that we have a conceptual problem. And if we want to solve this kind of problem, we have to go back and look at the whole theoretical framework that produces the problem. Of course there are jatis in India, and this is why I raised the question. It makes sense for people in India to talk also in terms of Varna, but that itself is something that should be researched.
Can I? Of course. I want to add to that the kind of research that anthropologists do and the remark that is just made about jatis, of course every village has jatis and these jatis interact with each other. If you want to call that a system, then of course every village has its own caste system. If the explanations that are given on the lines of Varna are not what is actually going on and do not allow us to understand it, which is what Srinivas, as I understand you, says, then it means that there is no systematicity, no such system that determines the interactions between jatis in the villages. So what we are saying is not that jatis don't exist, that there are no interactions between different jatis, that some jatis consider other jatis as inferior to them. In fact, research has shown that it's mostly among the groups that is called Dalits that there is a kind of hierarchy that can be found. So this is based on the research that we did in Karnataka. If you want to say that some servants in India are being abused by their, the people who they work for, you have to show that all servants in India are low caste people and that they are being treated badly because of this system. And then you have to show how that system causes this, this behavior, because you will find many examples where the people who are employing servants are not Brahmins, and that the servant is not so-called Dalit or low caste people. Of course you will find examples, and only those examples are taken as a proof for this existence of the caste system. But you can't prove that. So of course these cases have to be treated. No person can be, I don't know what, because I know many Brahmin people and upper caste people who have servants. I've never encountered them treating their servants badly, so I don't know of these cases. But the point is that we are not denying that bad things happen in India and that discrimination happens. The point is that if you see it as a result of a caste system that exists, then you will actually not be able to understand how jatis interact with each other, what actually exists in India, and what is the cause of bad things that happen. So, okay.
In response to that statement from the lawyer, the Indian lady in the Indian embassy in America who mistreated her servant, she was a Dalit. So I think it's not the servant she mistreated, as far as I know, was not a Dalit. I'm not And then I think traditionally, in today's India, the Brahmins have been at a disadvantage because traditionally if they stuck to a sort of an intellectual role in the modern industrial world, they can only find two occupations, either go into academia or go into civil service, and if they can't find jobs there, they haven't really got much else to go to because they haven't got the skills, they didn't have the skills. So many of them have gone really down the economic scale, which is quite evident in places like Punjab and other places. So I think these generalizations have influenced the debate in this country. When I and Bharti were the first ones who really got engaged in this debate in this 2010. And my concern was, what is it they're trying to legislate? I can't understand. Yes, we hear this word caste, but coming from three speakers today again, it endorses my position, which I give in a lecture in Mumbai, that whole understanding of Indian civilization, cultures, and people has been distorted by the use of the word caste. It's an incoherent word. Professor Fuller says that if in 1881 people didn't know how to respond to it, and my question is, what is the word in Indian languages that directly interprets as caste? Okay? So it should be very simple. You're describing another community. You're telling them what caste is. You can say it in Hindi or Bengali and say what your jati is. Yeah. But if it is jati they're describing, what's that got to do with Varna? Did those jatis not understand themselves in the Varna system? Is that what they were confused about? Is that what they were not responding to? What is it they were not responding to?
Sorry,
no, let me ask the question first.
Can I just point out, the questions were asked in the vernacular.
Sorry?
The questions the census enumerators were asked in the vernacular, they didn't go around the Punjabi villages asking people in English what caste is you. They talked to them in Punjabi.
Yeah,
so they were using the vernacular terms, jati or whatever.
And what is the vernacular? What is it they were confused about? It should be quite evident if I am part of a system, it should have been very evident to give the right response. So what is it they were not responding to is not quite understood. Were they not responding to did they not understand where their jati was in the Varna system?
No, they didn't understand what their own jati was. Right?
Right.
So, in other words, people were asked, what is your caste? And they said, I don't know what my caste is.
Right.
Which is, of course, one of the key pieces of evidence about how the census altered people's understanding of the caste system. It's indisputable that how Indians understand the system, whether you call it the caste system or any other term, how Indians understand it now is radically different from how they understood it in the 19th century. And one of many reasons is that they have, so to speak, learned to talk in the official language.
So the point here is that what the other speakers were saying, and I think it was that there is no coherence to the word caste. If it is something that got manufactured, no, but your point, you're actually proving my point. If it is something that people now understand because of the legacy of colonialism, it's a system created by colonialism, and we want to institutionalize it into this country rather than dealing it with it in a different way, it seems we're simply making it worse. And that's what my concern with this legislation is.